The story you are about to hear is one that will shake you to your core. Because it's not just about betrayal, it's about the darkest side of human greed hidden behind the mask of love. Imagine marrying the person who promised to protect you, care for you, and stand by you. But instead, that very person becomes the architect of your pain. Tonight, on The Twisted Minds, we bring you the story of a woman who took advantage of her own mentally disabled husband. But what makes this case horrifying is not just her cruelty. It's the chilling twist that no one saw coming, the kind of twist that will haunt you long after the video ends. Stick with me till the end, because once the truth is revealed, you will realize how dangerous trust can be when given to the wrong person. And before we dive deep, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to The Twisted Minds for more real stories that will leave you speechless. Our story begins in a small, quiet neighborhood where everyone knew each other's names. In this town lived a man named Arjun, a gentle soul in his early 30s who was known for his innocent smile and soft-spoken nature. Arjun was born with a developmental disability that made life harder for him. He could handle basic things, he worked part-time at a local grocery store, and he was capable of showing immense kindness, but he often relied on others for decision-making. For years, he lived under the protective care of his aging parents, who made sure he was safe and loved. But when they passed away within a short span of time, Arjun was left alone in the world, vulnerable, and searching for someone who could fill the void in his life. That was when Rani entered his world. Rani was strikingly beautiful, with sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything and a smile that could win trust in seconds. To the neighbors, she appeared as a blessing in disguise, a woman who, despite knowing Arjun's mental struggles, agreed to marry him and look after him. She must truly love him. People whispered with admiration. At first, even Arjun believed he had finally found someone who would never abandon him. Their wedding was small but emotional, and for the first time in years, Arjun felt complete. He held Rani's hand as though she was his anchor in a stormy sea. But behind her soft smile was a hunger that nobody recognized. A hunger for money, for control, and for a life where Arjun was nothing but a puppet in her game. It started slowly. Within weeks of marriage, Rani took over his bank accounts, convincing him that it was for his own good. "You don't need to worry. I'll handle everything," she would say, stroking his hand sweetly. Arjun, who trusted her blindly, never questioned her motives. He would nod and smile, happy that someone was taking care of him. Soon, she began selling his belongings. First small things like his late mother's jewelry, then larger possessions like furniture and even the old family house. When neighbors asked, she would laugh and say, "Oh," Arjun agreed. "He doesn't need these things." And Arjun, too confused to argue, would only stand silently beside her. But Rani's cruelty did not end with money. She began to manipulate Arjun emotionally, telling him he was useless, that he was lucky she even married him, and that without her, he would be living on the streets. Every day chipped away at his confidence until the once warm and gentle man became a shadow of himself. People in the neighborhood started noticing the change. They saw how Arjun's clothes were torn and dirty, while Rani flaunted new dresses and gold bangles. They heard him mutter to himself in the evenings, sitting alone outside his house, while Rani laughed on the phone inside. Rumors spread, but no one had the courage to intervene. After all, who would question a wife caring for her disabled husband? One night, however, something happened that began to unravel the truth. A neighbor heard loud screams coming from their house. It wasn't the usual argument. It was raw, terrified screaming. When they rushed to check, Rani quickly opened the door with a smile, saying, "Oh, it's nothing. Arjun just had one of his episodes. He gets frightened sometimes." The neighbors left reluctantly, but the image of Arjun's face, tear-stained, lips trembling, eyes screaming for help, stayed with them. They knew something was terribly wrong. What no one realized at that time was that Rani's game was far darker than just financial exploitation. She was hiding something much scarier, something that would make the entire town shiver once the truth came to light. For Arjun, every day was becoming a silent battle for survival, and for Rani, Every day was a step closer to the ultimate twist in her deadly plan. And this, my friends, is only the beginning of the story. What Rani was about to do next would shock not only the neighbors, not only the police, but even those who thought they had seen the worst sides of humanity. Stay with me as we move into the next chapter, because the scariest twist is still waiting. And before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the Twisted Minds. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Arjun's life had become a cage, and Rani was the jailer who held the key. Day by day, she stripped him of his independence, until he was nothing more than a fragile puppet tied to her commands. What once looked like a marriage of compassion now reeked of control and cruelty. Rani dictated every aspect of his life, what he wore, what he ate, when he could leave the house, and even whom he was allowed to talk to. His once gentle smile had faded into a nervous twitch. His shoulders slumped as if carrying an invisible weight. For neighbors, it was heartbreaking to see. But the mask Rani wore in public was convincing. Whenever anyone questioned her, she would sigh dramatically and say, "It's not easy taking care of someone like Arjun, but I try my best. People don't realize how much I sacrifice for him." The neighborhood, already filled with whispers, felt torn between sympathy for her supposed struggles and suspicion that something was wrong. Behind closed doors, however, the truth was uglier than anyone could imagine. Rani had started using Arjun's disability as a weapon. She would force him to sign documents he didn't understand, papers that transferred properties and accounts under her name. She mocked him when he hesitated, telling him he was too stupid to make decisions. "Do you want to end up homeless?" she would sneer, pushing the pen into his hand. Arjun, trembling, would sign because he feared losing her. His only comfort was the fleeting thought that maybe, deep down, she still cared. But the reality was far from it. To Rani, Arjun was not a husband. He was a source of income, a stepping stone to a life of wealth and power. As months passed, Rani grew bolder in her cruelty. She would host parties with her friends, laughing, drinking, and showing off her expensive clothes, while Arjun was locked in the bedroom, left with a plate of cold food. Sometimes she would deliberately humiliate him in front of guests, calling him a child trapped in a man's body, and making jokes about his inability to understand things. Every insult dug deeper into his fragile heart, but he remained silent, unable to defend himself. To him, love meant sacrifice, and he believed that maybe if he endured her cruelty, she would eventually treat him with kindness. But fate had other plans. One evening, Arjun's childhood friend, Samir, visited the town after years away. Samir had always known Arjun's gentle nature and was shocked to see how frail he had become. His clothes were unwashed, his eyes dull, and his once lively conversations reduced to hesitant whispers. When Samir asked Rani about it, she shrugged, saying, "He's always been like this. I do everything for him, but he doesn't appreciate it." Her words didn't sit right with Samir. He decided to meet Arjun privately, away from Rani's watchful eyes. That night, he found Arjun sitting alone under the old banyan tree near their street, staring into the darkness. At first, Arjun hesitated to speak, his lips trembling, but when Samir gently held his shoulder and said, "I'm here for you. Tell me the truth," something inside Arjun broke. Tears poured down his cheeks as he whispered about how Rani controlled his life, how she took his money, and how she made him feel worthless every day. It was the first time he had spoken about his suffering, and the words came out like a flood. Samir was horrified. He promised Arjun he would not let this continue, but he also knew it wouldn't be easy. Rani was clever, manipulative, and always one step ahead. Samir started observing quietly. He noticed how Rani flirted with other men when Arjun wasn't around, how she secretly met a wealthy businessman in town, and how she seemed to be planning something bigger than just draining Arjun's money. Samir's suspicion grew stronger when he discovered that Rani had recently taken out a large insurance policy in Arjun's name, with herself as the sole beneficiary. The realization hit him like lightnings. This wasn't just about greed anymore. This was about life and death. Meanwhile, Arjun grew weaker, not just emotionally but physically. Neighbors noticed he had lost weight. His skin looked pale, and his once bright eyes had dimmed with exhaustion. Some whispered that Rani might even be poisoning him slowly, but nobody dared to confront her without proof. Fear held them back, and Rani knew it. She wore her innocence like armor, playing the role of the devoted wife in public while tightening her grip on Arjun's life in private. Then came the night that would set everything in motion. A neighbor once again heard Arjun's desperate cries, louder and more heartbreaking than before. This time, it wasn't just a cry of fear, it was a cry of pain. The neighbor rushed to the window and saw Arjun collapse to the floor while Rani stood over him, her face cold and expressionless. When the neighbor shouted for help, Rani quickly knelt down, pretending to console him, yelling for others to call an ambulance. But for the first time, people saw through the act. They saw the darkness in her eyes before she put the mask back on. Arjun was rushed to the hospital unconscious, his body weak and frail. Doctors said he had been suffering from malnutrition and possible poisoning, but tests were still underway. Samir, standing by his bedside, swore he would uncover the truth and bring Rani's mask crashing down. What no one knew yet, however, was that Rani's plan had already taken a deadly turn, and the scariest twist was about to unravel. A twist that would not only shock the town, but reveal just how dangerous a twisted mind could become. The sterile white walls of the hospital room became Arjun's new prison. But unlike his home, here at least there were people who genuinely cared for him. Nurses noticed how frail he was, how his body seemed starved of proper food, and how his eyes carried the weight of years of silent suffering. Rani, however, played her role flawlessly. She sat beside his bed with a concerned look, holding his hand whenever doctors were around, and sighing dramatically when they explained his condition. "He's been like this for years," she told them, tears glistening in her eyes. "I try everything, but he just doesn't take care of himself." The doctors, initially sympathetic, started their treatment while Rani continued her act as the perfect wife. But Samir, watching from the corner, wasn't fooled. He had known Arjun all his life, and he had seen the change in him since Rani entered the picture. He suspected that Rani was not just lying, but actively harming her husband. The thought of it boiled his blood, but without evidence, he was powerless. Still, he refused to remain silent. He quietly began speaking to the medical staff, hinting at the possibility of abuse, urging them to dig deeper into Arjun's condition. Days passed, and Arjun's health improved slightly under the hospital's care. Proper food and treatment restored some of his strength, but his spirit remained fragile. Whenever Rani entered the room, his body tensed, his eyes darting nervously as though expecting punishment. Samir noticed this and pointed it out to the doctors, but Rani quickly covered it up. "He gets anxious," she explained smoothly. "It's part of his condition. I'm the only one who can calm him." Her words were laced with confidence, and for a while some of the staff believed her. But cracks began to show in her performance. One night, a nurse overheard Rani whispering angrily to Arjun when she thought no one was around. "You better not say a word," she hissed. "If you tell them anything, you'll regret it." The nurse, disturbed by what she heard, quietly reported it to the senior doctor. Suspicion began to grow. Meanwhile, Samir decided to dig deeper into Rani's past. He contacted people from her hometown and learned disturbing truths. Rani had been married once before, to another man who had mysteriously died in an accident. Rumors suggested she had manipulated him as well, draining his wealth before his sudden death. Although there had never been proof, whispers of foul play lingered in the air. Samir realized with horror that Arjun was not her first victim. He was just the latest, determined to expose her. He gathered documents showing how she had transferred Arjun's assets into her name, how she had forged signatures, and how she had recently taken out a massive life insurance policy. Every detail painted the picture of a woman with a cold, calculated plan. But Rani wasn't about to lose control. When she sensed that people were starting to question her, she turned her charm up to its highest level. She cooked meals for the hospital staff, pretended to cry in corridors, and told anyone who would listen that her husband's decline was breaking her heart. To many, she was convincing, But Samir and a few observant nurses knew better. The tension grew thicker each day as everyone waited for some kind of breakthrough. Then, one evening, Arjun finally gathered the courage to speak, with Samir sitting beside him and the doctor nearby. He whispered, his voice shaky but determined, "She hurts me. She takes my money. She gives me food that makes me sick." Tears rolled down his face as he confessed. It was the first time he openly admitted the abuse, and it left the room heavy with shock. Samir's fists clenched in anger, while the doctor quietly assured Arjun that he would be protected. But before they could act, Rani entered the room. The moment she saw the expressions on their faces, she knew something had changed. Her eyes darkened, but her lips curved into a false smile. "Is everything okay here?" she asked sweetly, but her gaze locked onto Arjun with a silent warning that sent shivers down his spine. The hospital contacted the police, and an investigation was officially opened. At last, it seemed like justice was within reach. Yet, just as hope began to rise, the scariest twist crept closer, because Rani, cornered and desperate, was not the kind of woman to surrender quietly. The mask was beginning to crack, and beneath it was a darkness far more terrifying than anyone expected. What she did next would not only endanger Arjun's fragile life, but also shock the entire town and leave investigators horrified. The police investigation brought a new wave of tension into the hospital, but Rani remained dangerously calm. She answered questions with perfect precision, her voice steady, her expressions flawless, convincing officers that she was the misunderstood wife of a mentally unstable man. She showed them receipts, fake bills, and even forged notes supposedly signed by Arjun, all meant to prove her innocence. For a moment, it seemed like her performance was working. The officers looked uncertain, the doctors hesitated, and Arjun's fragile testimony risked being dismissed as the ramblings of a vulnerable man. But Samir refused to back down. He brought forward the insurance documents, the property transfers, and the disturbing account of Rani's previous marriage. The officers' suspicions deepened, but they still lacked the undeniable proof that could shatter her mask. Rani knew this, and that knowledge made her even more dangerous. One stormy night, when the hospital hallways were quieter than usual, Rani decided to make her move. She walked into Arjun's room, her footsteps soft against the tiled floor, her face expressionless. Arjun lay half asleep, the faint beeping of machines filling the silence. But when he saw her, his body stiffened with fear. She leaned closer, her voice dripping with venom. "You've ruined everything," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I should have finished this long ago." Her hand slid into her purse, pulling out a small vial of liquid. Arjun's eyes widened in horror, but before he could scream, she pressed her hand against his mouth. "One more sound," she hissed, "and it will all be over." She began preparing to inject the liquid into his IV line, her movements swift and deliberate. For her, this was the final step, a quick end to Arjun, followed by the payout of his insurance. What Rani didn't know was that Samir, suspicious of her late night visits, had persuaded one of the nurses to keep watch. At that exact moment, the nurse entered the room, and her scream echoed down the hallway. "She's killing him." Chaos erupted as doctors and security rushed in. Rani dropped the vial in panic, her mask finally shattering as she snarled, "He's useless! He's always been useless!" Her once sweet, composed voice twisted into something monstrous, revealing the true face she had hidden for so long. The sight shocked everyone present. The devoted wife was nothing more than a predator, cold and merciless. The police arrived within minutes, restraining her as she fought and cursed. Arjun sobbed uncontrollably, clutching Samir's hand as if afraid to let go. "She wanted me gone," he cried, his voice trembling. The officers collected the vial, the documents, and the testimonies of the witnesses. For the first time, there was undeniable evidence. Rani was taken away in handcuffs, her eyes blazing with rage, screaming that she would never forgive them for ruining her plans. But just when it seemed like the nightmare was ending, the true twist unfolded. During interrogation, investigators uncovered a chilling detail. Rani had not been acting alone. Phone records revealed constant communication, with the wealthy businessman Samir had seen her with earlier. He wasn't just a lover, he was her accomplice. Together, they had orchestrated the entire scheme. The plan had been for Rani to marry Arjun, drain his wealth, and ultimately kill him for the insurance money, which she would then split with her partner. But here was the twist that froze even the most seasoned detectives. The businessman wasn't just her accomplice, he was her ex-husband, the very man believed to have died years ago. The two had staged his death, vanished, and resurfaced under different identities. Arjun had unknowingly walked into the web of two of the most cunning con artists the town had ever seen. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community. People who had once admired Rani now looked back in horror at how easily she had deceived them. The police scrambled to piece together the bigger picture, realizing that Arjun wasn't her first victim, but just the latest in a long chain of carefully planned schemes. Evidence of other frauds, missing persons, and financial scams began to surface, all linked back to Rani and her so-called dead husband. Arjun, lying weak in his hospital bed, broke down when he heard the truth. It wasn't just that his wife had betrayed him. It was that she had never been his wife in the first place, only a mask worn by a predator. His heart shattered, but in his tears there was also relief. The monster was finally unmasked, and though his innocence had been exploited, his voice had at last been heard. Samir stayed by his side, promising he would never be alone again. Yet even as Rani sat in her cell, smirking with cold defiance, the haunting question lingered. How many others had suffered in silence before Arjun, and how many secrets still lay buried in the shadows of her twisted past? The arrest of Rani and the shocking revelation about her so-called dead ex-husband left the entire community shaken. For days, the story dominated headlines, not just in their small town but across the state. News channels painted Rani as the Black Widow of deception, a woman whose beauty masked the heart of a predator, while the man she called her accomplice was exposed as a career con artist who had staged his death years ago. Together, they had built a network of fraud, using people like Arjun as pawns in their game. The trial that followed was one of the most sensational the region had ever seen. Prosecutors laid out the evidence, the fake documents, the staged death, the insurance policies, the vial of poison, and above all, Arjun's tearful testimony. Samir stood by him through it all, supporting him as he faced the courtroom, filled with strangers staring at him like a victim on display. But Arjun's words carried a power no evidence could rival. In his soft, trembling voice, he said, "I only wanted love. I never knew love could be used to destroy me." His testimony broke hearts across the courtroom and sealed Rani's fate. The defense tried every tactic, claiming Rani had been under pressure, that Arjun's memory was unreliable, that the vial was planted. But the weight of proof was overwhelming. The jury took little time to deliberate, and when the verdict was announced, the courtroom erupted in gasps. Rani and her partner were both found guilty of attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. The judge, visibly disturbed by the cruelty of the crimes, handed down one of the harshest sentences possible: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Rani, however, did not cry or plead. She smirked, as though mocking the system itself, and whispered under her breath, "This isn't the end." Her cold defiance sent chills through everyone present, a reminder that even in chains, her twisted mind still carried venom. For Arjun, freedom from her grasp felt like waking from a nightmare. But the scars were deep. He spent months in therapy, slowly rebuilding his health, learning to trust again. The hospital staff who had once treated him now visited him as friends, offering the compassion he had long been denied. Samir became his closest support, ensuring he was never again left vulnerable to predators. The community, once blind to his suffering, now rallied around him, ashamed of their silence but determined to give him the love and care he deserved. Small acts of kindness, a neighbor bringing him meals, children greeting him with smiles, strangers offering him help, became the healing balm for wounds that words alone could not mend. But despite this, Arjun often sat by the window, staring into the distance, haunted by the face of the woman who had pretended to be his wife. Her betrayal was more than cruelty. It was the theft of his innocence, the shattering of his simple belief that love meant safety. The scariest twist of all, however, came not from the courtroom, but from the whispers that followed. Investigators revealed that Rani and her partner were likely connected to cases in other cities. Cases of missing men, sudden deaths labeled as accidents, and families bankrupted by mysterious schemes. Files were reopened, and what was uncovered painted an even darker picture. Rani was not just a manipulative wife, she was part of a larger trail of destruction that spanned years. Arjun was lucky. He had survived to tell his story. Many others had not. The thought weighed heavily on everyone, but it also turned his survival into something greater, a warning. His suffering became a voice for those who could no longer speak. In the end, Arjun found strength not in forgetting, but in sharing his truth. With Samir's encouragement, he began speaking at community gatherings, warning others about the dangers of blind trust and the importance of standing up against abuse. His words, once filled with fear, now carried quiet resilience. "I was broken," he told them, "but I am still here, and I will not let my silence destroy me again." The applause that followed wasn't just for him. It was for every silent victim whose story had been buried by manipulation and fear. And as for Rani, behind bars, her legend only grew darker. Some said she still plotted, still whispered promises of revenge to anyone who would listen. Others believed her twisted mind was broken at last, trapped in a prison of her own making. But the truth remained. Her betrayal had scarred an innocent man forever, and her name would forever be remembered as a warning of how love, when corrupted by greed and malice, could become the deadliest weapon of all. And now, dear viewers, as we close this chilling tale of betrayal, survival, and the darkest twist of all, I want you to remember one thing. Evil often hides behind the sweetest smile. Trust is precious, but in the wrong hands, it can destroy lives. If Arjun's story has moved you, if it has opened your eyes to the shadows lurking behind closed doors, then take a moment right now to hit that like button and subscribe to the Twisted Minds. Because here, we bring you the stories others are too afraid to tell, the stories that remind us just how dangerous a twisted mind can truly be. Stay safe, stay aware, and join us again for another tale that will keep you awake at night.